Welcome to the You're Not Invisible After 50 podcast. I'm Kiran Kumar, founder and host of You're Not Invisible After 50. Despite the title, you don't have to be over 50 to listen to this podcast. No matter whether you're 25, 45, or 65, we can all learn lessons from each other to help us build a better, more fulfilled life. Come listen to the inspiring stories of all the phenomenal women over 50 who are kicking ass and making an impact. They are not invisible. I'm not invisible, and neither are you. So no matter what society says, life doesn't end at 50. In fact, it's just beginning. Welcome to the You're Not Invisible After 50 podcast. I'm Kiran and host of this podcast. We're all about showcasing phenomenal women over 50 who are kicking ass and making an impact. You'll get to hear all the inspiring stories why you don't have to be invisible after 50. So sit back and enjoy the wonderful life story from this week's guest. My guest today is Eliza VanCort. Hi, Eliza.
Hi, so great to be on your show. I'm really excited. I love what you're doing.
I'm really excited having you here. So let's begin. I'm going to get you to introduce yourself to our listeners in one line before we move on to the body of this podcast. So how would you introduce yourself to the listeners?
I'm a best-selling author and a parent who has devoted my life to helping women and really all humans claim space.
I like that very much. So let's move into the body of the podcast. So in this podcast, we're going to cover your life story, the past, the present, if there was a trigger point at 50, and what the future looks like. So let's begin at the beginning or wherever you want to start in terms of the past. Tell us what you want to tell us.
No one's ever said, tell us what you want to tell us. I love that.
Good.
Well, I had a pretty difficult upbringing. My mom was apparently a really wonderful mother until I was about 4.5. And then she became paranoid schizophrenic. And she ended up kidnapping me. My father had custody and taking me across the country by truck, from truck stop to truck stop, from New York to California. And what happened on that trip made me start to conflate invisibility with safety. As I got older, I sort of started crawling out of that. I had this amorphous idea that being invisible wasn't safe. It's really dangerous. And I started becoming a teacher. I went to school for political science, but then I ended up going into the arts. And for decades, I was actually an acting teacher. And then in 2013, I was hit by a car while I was riding my bike. And I had a bilateral brain injury and a subdural hematoma. And that was sort of the beginning of my journey to personally claim my own space. And it was the beginning of the birth of my book.
Okay, so do you want to talk a little bit about like your childhood with your mother? Because I've read a little bit about your history, but do you want to share some of that with the listeners?
Well, I think that it was obviously very difficult. And my father was looking for me, and that was scary. It happened 3 times, so that wasn't good at all. And I think when a kid grows up believing that their reality is one thing, and then you have someone who you used to trust, who really was foundational for you and very trustworthy, suddenly saying, the sky is striped. It's incredibly confusing. It's really tough. For me, getting the first step to kind of crawling out of that was actually becoming a big shot in my high school in musical theater, because I kind of learned what it felt like to be out in front of everyone. And I used to kind of hide behind this curtain of hair, and I was really scared about the world. And I think actually a lot of times we revisit and relearn a lot of our trauma, right? As we go on, it gets reinforced. But thankfully, I had a lot of therapy. My father put me in therapy right away. And I credit that for the fact that I'm actually a vertical human right now.
A very vertical human and a very strong human as well, and also giving that strength to other people. So that is just so awesome, really, in terms of what you go paying forward. I think that is a real gift. So let's just talk about a little bit about your accident, because that again, so you had a challenging childhood, And then you had this major accident. And how old were you then?
Well, that was 2013, and I'm about to be 52, so I'm not sure how old I was, but if you can do the math on that. But I was riding my bike. Actually, I'm going to brag. So my son, my oldest son, is the actual United States National Collegiate Cycling Champion for 3 years in a row.
Okay.
So
Congratulations.
Yes, I'm incredibly proud of him, my baby, my biggest baby. Besides, actually, he's not my biggest, my second biggest baby. But we're a cycling family. And I was following all the rules. And what happened was somebody was about 15 minutes away by car from an intersection. I was 15 minutes away by bike. And they posted on Facebook a little picture of a woman looking out of their car. And the caption said, "You call it road rage. I call it aggressively maneuvering around beeps that don't know how to effing drive." Got in their car. Yep. Met me at the light, ran through the light and hit me.
Wow. No way.
Yeah. In fact, at the deposition, they did not know that my best friend had found this and screenshotted it. And they pushed it over to her and said, "Can you read this, please?" And that was the beginning of the settlement at that point. But she, I got a bilateral brain injury and a subdural hematoma. And I wasn't able, about 3 months in, I thought that I was doing a lot better. And because I was remembering things again, because up until then, I couldn't remember. I'd go to bed at night, I'd remember everything, I'd wake up, half my day would be gone.
Wow,
it was terrifying. Yeah, it was terrifying. I felt like I kind of understood at that moment why countries go to war over and over, because they forget why they started fighting. If you don't remember your history, like, how do you ever not repeat it? And
absolutely.
you can't learn, So one of my friends, I said, I'm remembering everything. I don't understand at all why I am having trouble. Like, everybody's kind of acting kind of strange around me. And I didn't get it. And she said, "Eliza, they're not acting strange. You're acting strange.
Okay.
Your vocabulary is shot. You look like when you speak, you're kind of having a third grader's cadence. And then I called my friend who is a nurse, who's one of those friends who like tells you everything, never lies. Yeah. And she goes, "Dude, you sound like a stoned third grader." And I was like, oh no. So I went in my bed and I kind of decided I was never going to get out of my bed. I just kind of was like, this is too much. And at a certain point, I thought, you know what? I'm not going to let this be the thing that really takes me down. I've gone through too much. Yeah. So I started rebuilding my communication brick by brick by brick. And a while later, one of my students came to visit me, quite a while later, and she started to cry. And I thought, oh no. And I said, wait, am I not better? And she said, no, you're you again. In fact, I think you're stronger. And that was a really amazing moment for me. I realized I'd sort of cracked the code of communication, and I'd cracked the code of claiming space. I'd gone beyond communication to what is it that makes someone listen to and someone else ignored. And that was the beginning of really diving into my journey of wanting to share what I'd learned and all my experience with the world.
So in terms of that, so what started that kind of, that started the kind of the ball rolling in terms of wanting to make a difference. But what made you actually then go out into the world to actually then, shout about or talk about what you've been through?
Right. Well, I do workshops. I was doing workshops and talks all over the world, as I still do for my job. But I found that when I would do it with a mixed audience of all genders, I would walk to the bathroom, sounds unrelated, just wait for it, and I'd be washing my hands, and women would follow me to the bathroom. And I'd always sit there and I'd look around. Two women would kind of sidle up next to me, and one of them would say, "I got to ask you something I didn't want to ask in Q&A." And I'd say, "What's that?" And then they'd ask me one of maybe 50 questions. And those 50 questions basically fell into 5 buckets. And those 5 buckets were what I had already identified as what makes someone able to claim space. And those questions, the answers to them fell into those 5 buckets. And that's when I thought, I'm beginning to have a book here, a 5-part book where I can answer these questions, because they shouldn't be in the darkness. We shouldn't have to have these conversations in the bathroom. As much as I love the women's bathroom, it really needs to be in the sunlight. And so that was kind of my goal, and my passion was bringing these conversations out of the darkness and into the sunlight.
So you wrote a book. You wrote one book.
I wrote a book. I sure did.
And that was a bestseller on Amazon.
It was a number one bestseller. It was crazy. Wow. It was so exciting.
Really impressed with that. Absolutely. Yeah. So in that book, what are you giving to your readers? What is it, the 5 buckets of information, or is it going to be a 5-part, series?
No. It's a 5 bucket, although people keep saying you need to write a blanks guide to claiming space. And I may co-author that with some people, because I have a lot of people. I've had men come to me and say, you should teach us like a man's guide to supporting women claiming space, or we should, So I thought, okay, well, maybe I want to do that. But this book has 5 parts. There's an introduction. Each introduction is a personal story about me. And then I talk about that aspect of claiming space. And if you want, I can go through those 5 aspects for you.
If you want to share them with your listeners,
we're all ears.
We're all ears, Eliza.
because how you do it actually is in the book. So I'm not giving away the farm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Don't give that away, because people have to buy the book.
The farm. So the first aspect comes from my background as an acting teacher, teaching the Meisner technique. And that is physicality and voice. People who are really commanding the room often know how to claim space with their bodies and with their voices. And I go into detail on how you do that. The next one is, how do you build community? So do you have anti-mentors in your life that you're letting poison your community? Are you networking in an authentic and real way? How do you build community? People who claim space know how to build authentic community. The next one is, how do you not self-sabotage? And I think there are a lot of books written that say, oh, you're going to be fine. You're going to get over it. And I think we're going to be fine, but I don't think we're going to get over it. And I don't think we should. As someone who has forgotten what happened to me, it's not helpful to get over it and forget. And the way I kind of think about it is, we all have these boulders in our lives, these boulders of pain and trauma and things that we wish didn't happen. And, we can't carry those around. They'll crush us. But if we can just sort of whittle them down and wear them down to a pebble and put them in our pocket, so we can touch them once in a while and say, I was there. I remember. I won't do that again. I learned from that. I survived that, and now I'm stronger. Those are things that make us stronger. They don't destroy us. They don't weigh us down. They're just memories, memories of our triumphs, really, in many ways, of getting through things.
That brings tears to my eyes. And I love the analogy, because I think it's true that you carry the weight of those. May they be smaller, but you still carry those weight, because those are things that remind you of what happened and how you've grown, and that you survived. And, I think that is so important as a life lesson, because, this is why we're doing the work we're doing, because from our own experiences, we learn and we teach somebody else something different as well, how to cope with that. And if we're not in touch with what happened to us, then you've lost it, haven't you? You can't be authentic.
Absolutely. And I think that, this pressure to feel like get over it is ridiculous. It's more, have you learned from it? Do you feel stronger? Yeah. What have you taken from this? And I think that's sort of the focus of part 2, is not letting that stuff weigh you down, or not letting self-sabotage weigh you down. And I think if you feel like you have to get over it, sometimes you can get discouraged, and then it does weigh you down. Yeah, the next one is how to protect yourself. How do you protect yourself? How do you set boundaries? How do you stop mansplaining? Because this is a book focused on women. How do you stop interruptions, sexual harassment, bullying, all of those things? And I had wonderful experts who I got to talk to in depth, who I love, wonderful women, and it's just fantastic. And then the last section is intersectionality. I found that women who hung out with women who just look like them, for whatever reason, did not command space the way women who hung out with women who didn't look like them did. My theory on this is that, as a white woman, I can speak for myself. When I hang out with Black women or women of color, I mess up. because I'm white and I don't know certain things that they experienced. And that messing up, if I'm open to it and if I'm trusted by my friend, will allow them to say, hey, that didn't feel good. And that makes me have to self-reflect and learn. And that makes me open to a whole world I didn't understand and to growth. And I think that growth as women, if we don't rise up together, I don't think we'll ever rise. And so for me, that's a really important part of it.
I totally agree with that, because as a woman of color, I'm actually, and this podcast isn't just it's for women of all backgrounds. The fact is, I'm actually touching people in the States, and I'm touching people in India, or, Afro-Caribbean people. Everybody is welcome, because then, as you just said, Eliza, we grow from that experience, and we also break down stereotypes. And that is so important, because, I have some women from India coming on, and they're educated, intelligent women. And I want to show the world that everybody has got their own background. We cannot stereotype. We can't, brush everybody with one brush and they say everybody's the same. It's exactly what you said. So I think, yeah. And I think that's really warming to know that you're open to that, and you're encouraging other women or other people to be open to it too.
Yeah, for me, that is one of the main pillars, or the foundational ideas that I have, is that, I think the feminist movement has not gotten as far as it could have, because it has a history of racism in the United States. And we haven't really addressed it. We haven't faced it, and we're not working quite hard enough to undo it. And until we do that, we have 50% of the population. We should be claiming 50% of the space, but we can't do that if we aren't united with all women.
Absolutely. Well said. I applaud you for that. Absolutely applaud you for that. So let's move on. Is there anything else you'd like to say about your past, and because we're going to move on to what you're doing currently, which is exciting as well. So
no, I'm good.
You're done. So let's talk about what you're up to currently. What are you doing at the moment?
Yeah, well, my paperback is about to launch, which is really exciting. Funny story. I got this email from my publisher saying, we're going to launch your paperback. And I called my former editor and I was like, I'm going to send them the most blistering letter. Or do they think I can't sell more hardcovers? And she said, Eliza, stop. This is the dream. That's why it says now in paperback. It means you're selling out of your hardcover. And then I called my former publicist, and she was like, who's working at a publishing house. And she said, authors beg us to do a paperback launch. So I had no idea. I was all angry.
Again, a second applause for you, because you're launching the book. So yeah, when does that book come out?
February 21st is the launch.
Fabulous.
And I'm also launching my own podcast, which is exciting, on March 3rd. And I'm really excited about the format of it, actually. I'm thrilled. I couldn't figure out how I wanted to do it, because I think I'm a little like you in that I'm definitely not someone to just sit there and ask a question and not put my soul and my personhood into it. You know what I mean?
Thank you very much for that.
You know what I mean? So I really wanted it to be, two people having a real interchange. So what I'm going to do, but I also want to talk about my life, and my life has been kind of challenging, but also interesting. And a lot of my followers are interested in it. So what I did is I actually went through my life for the first season and mapped out 14 pivot points in my life. I think it's 14. And I'm going to do just a little opener where I talk about that one thing that happened. And then I'm going to get an expert who speaks to that thing if it happens to others. So for example, I was born the day that my father's mother died.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
And it was very traumatizing for him. And yet he was thrilled because he had a new baby girl. And so I'm going to talk to an expert about what happens with trauma. What is trauma? What happens if you're born into trauma? What happens with, a trauma that's like a familial trauma versus a country? Like what's happening to people, young people with the trauma in Ukraine, like all of these different in Iran. So I'm each point, I'm using that thing to kind of break off and figure out, okay, so what do you do when this happens, or how do you handle this? And since I have so much to talk about, I'm going to have room for plenty of experts.
I'm sure you're going to have a lot of subjects and a lot of topics to cover. Absolutely.
Exactly.
I'll be certainly listening in to your podcast.
Oh, well, thank you. I think it's going to go well. I'm going to have wonderful, wonderful women on. I'm really excited about it.
Fabulous. So is there anything that, because this podcast, of course, is You're Not Invisible After 50. So was there anything around the 50 mark that changed for you, or maybe it didn't change for you, or, did anything kind of come to light, or,
Yeah. Well, a couple things happened in my 50s. I mean, the first thing is before I turned 50, and I told people I was going to write a book, and I was almost 50 at that point.
Okay.
Everyone said to me, "You're crazy. You're going to write a book before you're a first-time author. You're going to be around 50 when this book launches. Like, what universe are you in?" And I happen to be a bit oppositional. There's a great Maya Angelou's thing, like, want me to do something, tell me I can't do it. And
you sound very much like I do. Somebody tells me no, and I go, yeah, well, actually, I want to do something totally different.
Exactly. I actually call myself an oppositional optimist.
Oh, I like that. That's just
I am oppositionally optimistic. So, and it sounds like you're pretty oppositionally optimistic as well.
Absolutely. Tell me not to do something, I will do it. Carry on, though.
So that was the first thing, and that made me all the more determined. The second thing is my son was like, "Mom, you got to go on TikTok." And I said, "I can't go on TikTok, Lucian. I'm old. Like, what are you talking about?" And he's like, "No, Mom, they're old people. Don't worry. There are old people on TikTok." So I started doing TikTok, and I did maybe one every couple months, and it was terrible. And then I thought, what am I doing? I'm a teacher. That's what I do. Why don't I actually go in and do my teaching on TikTok and just teach people about stuff from my book and my life? And the second one I did just blew up for me. I had 90,000, which isn't my big, now I have, I think 2.1 million is my biggest post. But at the time it was like 90K views. And I was like, whoa, this is amazing. So that was a really, really big deal for me. And that was another thing that I thought, you know what, I don't need to worry about this age thing. And I have young people on it now who say, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. You're like the mentor I didn't have." And then the final thing that happened to me is when I was 50, I met this amazing man who, at that point, I had decided I was not going to meet a nice boy. And I didn't particularly want to meet a nice boy because I was very happy with myself and my life, which is apparently exactly when you meet nice boys. So
I think that's absolutely true. And it's actually interesting what you just said, because I'm much older than you. So I'm 58, going to be 59. I want to write a book this year about my life. I'm gone on TikTok, and I had the exact conversation about what do I say? What do I do? At the end of the day, you just have to be your authentic self. So let's see how that pans out. And yes, the third point, at the end of the day, you've got to be happy with yourself, and then everything else will fall in its own place. And it's regardless of age, so, but it's exciting when it's at 50 plus or 50.
Absolutely. Well, I think you actually do better when you're older. That's my feeling. I mean, if you're lucky enough to stay with the same person, I was with someone for over 20 years and we're still good friends, and that's great. If I'd stayed with him, that'd be great if it was the right thing. But, Louis C.K., which I know a lot of people aren't thrilled with him, and he's done some yucky things, but he had one very wise thing he said, some very horrible things actually, but he said, when people say, "Oh, it's so sad you got divorced," he says, "Let me tell you something. No good marriage has ever ended in divorce." That would be sad if you got married and you were happy you got a divorce, but that has never happened.
Yeah.
So, if you get a divorce and you're in your 50s, if you do the work, you're older and you're wiser. And the person that I met now, there's no way I would have dated him 10 years ago. No way, because I wasn't ready for this level of depth in my relationship. And now I am. And I'm, he's absolutely freaking amazing.
So congratulations to that. But it's amazing that, I think, as you just said, Eliza, you have to be ready for it. You have to be comfortable place of your own, because then everything will just fall into its own place. And yeah, I mean, I left my husband at 52, so that was a bit of a kind of like, 25 years married. So there you go. That's life, isn't it?
Yeah.
But so let's just kind of move on. So that's in your 50s. Anything else around the 50 mark? Or I mean, that's quite a lot.
Those are the biggies, but it's a lot. Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Oh, sounds exciting. Sounds exciting. Okay, before we kind of come to the end of the podcast, we're going to talk about the tips that one can give. So let's look at the 5 tips that you would give to anybody under 50. So
under 50.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I do have my 5 aspects of claiming space, but I read my book and try to master those. But here, under 50, I guess there are several things. The first is it's okay not to know. And so that's part of life, is the exploration. Don't put pressure on yourself to know everything right away. The next thing I would say is failure is actually the most important gift we can ever give ourselves. Because if you fall and you get back up again and you learn and you grow, that is, I mean, how many times do you say, I learned so much from what went well? That doesn't happen very much. It's, I learned so much from that fall on my face, so I think that's important. If we're talking to women specifically here, is that correct? Yeah. Make sure you are financially independent. It's very easy when you're in a moment and you're in love and you're having a baby to think this will last forever. And you think, I'm a corporation. It doesn't matter if things go wrong, whatever. I actually think your relationship is stronger if you make sure you maintain financial independence. And I think that's really, really important. The next one is, I think that it's really important to explore your sexuality. I think that women often get the message that we need to be good still. We need to be, and I think it's important for women to explore all aspects of themselves. And finally, and this is something that I believe for both, but I think that it's really important to believe you have the right to claim space. We get so many messages that we have to make ourselves small in order to make other people comfortable. And anyone who wants you to be small so they're comfortable is not really worth being around.
I totally agree with that one. And what about the 3 tips to women who are over 50? What would you say to them?
Well, I think the first thing is you don't need a guy. I really believe that. You don't need a man. You just need electricity. And I know you're going to the wrong place here. For an electric blanket, I won't say for other reasons, but you just need to be warm at night and have really wonderful friends. The next thing is nurture your friendships. I think that's so important. As we get older, I think sometimes, especially if you're in a couple, you can drift from your girlfriends. And I think our girlfriends are really what hold us up in the end. And I think it's so important. And finally, it is never, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, but I'm going to just reiterate, it's never too late. It's until you are dead, you have an ability to change paths. And I think this whole idea, well, I won't go into it, of the sunk cost fallacy, which is, oh, I put so much time in, I might as well keep doing it. Keeping doing it doesn't make it any better. You're just doing it more. So change your mind.
Absolutely. I just think, I was on a podcast and I said exactly the same thing in terms of, I didn't think that I'll be doing a podcast a year ago. I didn't think I was going to be, starting a business a year ago, or even thinking of writing a book a year ago. But here we are. And this is because you're open to those things and never close the door until you're dead. Absolutely.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
Well, Eliza, it's been really interesting, really informative, and just so lovely to hear such a woman who's so much in her own space and claiming that space, but also showing people the way. So thank you for your time. It's been wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Well, thank you. I think what you're doing is so critically important, because women over 50 should not be invisible. And I think it's wonderful that you're giving visibility. So thank you.
Oh, bless you. Thank you very much for that. That brings tears to my eyes, and I cry at every podcast I actually do. So yes. So thank you very much. Thanks for being on here. And I'm going to certainly be following you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the You Are Not Invisible After 50 podcast. If you want to hear more from some amazing women over 50 who are kicking ass and making impact, then don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, available on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Remember to rate, comment, and share with other fabulous women. And together, let's change the narrative that you don't have to be invisible, no matter how old you are. Check out our other services on www.you'renotinvisibleafter50.com and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok. And always remember that life doesn't have to end at 50. In fact, it's just beginning.